Biggie didn't want to go to L.A. He knew exactly what the vibes were. He understood the tension was at an all-time high, and according to people who were actually there, the industry pushed him anyway. They pushed him right into what became his death. That claim comes directly from Kirk Burroughs, a label co-founder who appears in 50 Cent's new Netflix documentary that dropped December 2nd, 2025. And honestly, that's just the beginning of what this series reveals. For nearly 3 decades, we've been stuck in a loop of conspiracy theories, Reddit threads, and unanswered questions about what happened to Tupac and Biggie. Now 50 Cent, who has never been one to hold back, is pulling together testimonies from former industry insiders, audio recordings that have never been made public, and archival materials that paint a picture way darker than most people expected. So let's get into what this documentary actually claims and why some people are saying it changes everything we thought we knew about these murders. The documentary wastes no time getting into the details. Episode 2 focuses specifically on the murders, and it brings in 3 key witnesses who were embedded in the industry during that era. Kirk Burroughs, a label co-founder, Mark Curry, who was signed to Bad Boy Records, and Roxanne Johnson, the ex-wife of Craig Mack. These aren't random commentators or people looking in from the outside. These are individuals who saw the machinery working from the inside. And here's where it gets interesting. The series argues that the East Coast versus West Coast beef wasn't just a rivalry playing out in diss tracks and magazine interviews. According to the documentary, it was a proxy war with actual street gangs involved. We're talking about allegations that the Crips aligned with East Coast interests and the Bloods with the West Coast. If that's accurate and the documentary presents multiple testimonies supporting this claim, then we're not talking about rappers beefing over lyrics anymore. We're talking about violence with real consequences being fueled by something much bigger. Now, let's talk about what Kirk Burroughs says in the series because it's probably the most damning testimony. He reflects on Tupac's murder in Las Vegas on September 13th, 1996, and suggests that with mature reflection, it becomes clear there was orchestration behind it. But here's what really stands out. He describes what happened after Tupac was killed and how the industry responded. According to Burroughs, there was immediate pressure to continue business as usual. Keep promoting albums, keep the money machine running. And specifically, he claims that Biggie was pushed, maybe even coerced, to travel to Los Angeles to promote his album Life After Death. This was in March 1997, just 6 months after Tupac had been killed in what was essentially enemy territory at the height of the coastal tension. Think about that for a second. According to multiple people interviewed in this documentary, Biggie expressed reservations about going to L.A. He wasn't being reckless. He understood the situation. But the label's promotional schedule, the business interests, the album rollout, all of that apparently took priority over basic safety concerns. Burroughs' testimony literally argues that Biggie was ushered to his death because the industry's obsession with album sales created the perfect storm. Now, the timing of this, not a coincidence. 50 Cent is dropping this series almost exactly 28 years after Biggie was gunned down in Los Angeles on March 9th, 1997. And the documentary is explicitly connecting dots that have been whispered about for decades, but never laid out with this level of detail. But here's the part nobody talks about. The documentary doesn't just rely on reflections and analysis from people looking back on that era. It claims to have concrete evidence that adds a completely new dimension to the story. The series features audio recordings that allegedly include voices of key figures from that period. Now, the documentary doesn't release everything, and some details remain unclear. But the implication is that these recordings paint a picture of coordination and knowledge that goes beyond what the public has ever heard. If you followed this case for years, you know that the official investigation into both murders has been criticized for going nowhere. Neither case was ever officially solved. And that's part of what makes these alleged recordings so significant. They're being presented as evidence that there was more organization behind these killings than random street hits. And this connects to something the documentary emphasizes throughout. Both Tupac and Biggie were more than rappers. They were cultural icons whose influence went way beyond music. Tupac was described as the poetic revolutionary, the voice of a generation. Biggie, the notorious B.I.G., was one of the most gifted lyricists hip-hop has ever seen. Their deaths weren't just tragedies for their families and friends. They represented the loss of two artists who were shaping culture in real time. The documentary also gets into the broader context of what was happening in hip-hop during the mid-90s. This was the era of Death Row Records on the West Coast and Bad Boy Records on the East Coast. Suge Knight and Diddy were the faces of their respective labels, and the tension between them became one of the defining narratives in music history. But according to this series, what was being sold to the public as a rap beef was actually something far more dangerous happening behind the scenes. Now, 50 Cent's involvement in this project makes sense when you think about his history. He's always been willing to call out industry figures. He's been involved in his own high-profile conflicts, and he's built a reputation for saying things that other people in the industry won't say publicly. This documentary feels like an extension of that approach. He's using his platform and his credibility to amplify testimonies that might otherwise never reach a mainstream audience. The series is also timing its release during a period when there's renewed interest in cold cases from this era. In 2023, there were arrests related to Tupac's murder, with Dwayne Keith Davis, known as Keith D, being charged in connection with the killing. That case is still ongoing, but it's reignited public attention on what actually happened in Las Vegas that night. 50 Cent's documentary seems positioned to add to that conversation with additional perspectives and alleged evidence. What makes this documentary different from previous attempts to investigate these murders is the access to people who were actually present during that era. We've seen plenty of documentaries about Tupac and Biggie over the years, but most of them rely on journalists, historians, or people who were observing from a distance. This series claims to feature individuals who were inside the industry, who understood the pressures, who saw the rivalries up close, and who are now willing to speak on record about what they witnessed. The question that keeps coming up throughout the documentary is whether these deaths were inevitable given the circumstances. The industry was making massive amounts of money from the coastal rivalry. The tension was good for sales. The beef sold magazines and drove album purchases. And according to some of the testimonies in the series, there were people who had financial incentives to keep that tension going, regardless of the real-world consequences. Look, this documentary is going to be controversial. Some people will watch it and say it confirms everything they suspected for decades. Others will question whether the testimonies can be fully trusted, or whether the evidence is as concrete as the series suggests. That's fair. These are unsolved murders, and anyone claiming to have definitive answers should be approached with some skepticism. But what 50 Cent has done here is compile a collection of testimonies and alleged evidence that challenges the official narrative in specific ways. The claim that Biggie was pushed to L.A. despite expressing concerns about safety. The allegation that gang affiliations were coordinated with label interests. The suggestion that there was orchestration behind Tupac's death. These are serious claims from people who say they were there. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think the industry bears some responsibility for what happened to Tupac and Biggie? Or is that placing blame in the wrong place? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on this. If you want more deep dives like this one, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.